Many cities don't look like places built for safety. They look like places built for speed and growth. Crowded streets, fragile buildings, concrete stacked high without much thought for what could go wrong. It all feels solid until a storm, fire, or earthquake tears it apart. But this isn't just about broken walls or flooded roads. It's about how disasters expose hidden flaws in the way we build and plan. Let's talk about how catastrophe forces change, and why every disaster is also a chance to build smarter and stronger. Disasters have a way of showing us what we did not want to see. A city may seem strong, its buildings steady, and its streets safe. Then a fire, flood, or earthquake comes, and the illusion falls apart. A disaster strips away appearances. It reveals weak walls, poor planning, and choices made for speed or cost rather than safety. When this happens, people do not just rebuild what was lost. They build differently. The destruction forces a new way of thinking. In this way, disaster becomes more than tragedy. It becomes a teacher. When a building falls, the cause is rarely simple. Often, the roots of failure go back years. A builder may have used cheaper wood instead of stone. City leaders may have approved narrow streets to fit more houses. Inspectors may have looked the other way. Over time, these decisions stack up like kindling. A single spark can turn them into an inferno. Natural disasters expose these hidden problems in a single, violent moment. The damage is sudden, but the weaknesses were there all along. Consider the Great Fire of London in 1666. At that time, London was crowded with wooden houses packed tightly together. Streets were narrow, and buildings leaned toward one another. When a small bakery fire broke out, it spread with terrifying speed. Wind carried the flames from roof to roof. By the end, much of the city was ash. In the chaos, people saw how the very layout of London had fueled the disaster. The solution was clear. When the city rebuilt, leaders banned wooden buildings in favor of stone and brick. Streets were widened to stop future fires from jumping so easily from house to house. That fire reshaped the city and its construction rules. It was a painful lesson, but one that saved lives in the centuries that followed. The pattern repeated in San Francisco in 1906. An earthquake shook the city with violent force, but the shaking was only part of the destruction. Fires broke out across San Francisco, many caused by broken gas lines. Wooden buildings collapsed, trapping people and blocking rescue efforts. The disaster made it clear that the city was not ready for such forces. Out of the ruins came a new idea. Buildings could be designed to resist earthquakes. This was the birth of seismic building codes. Engineers studied which structures had fallen and which had stayed standing. They learned to reinforce walls, anchor foundations, and design flexible frames that could sway without breaking. Today, these codes save countless lives around the world, especially in areas prone to earthquakes. Disasters teach not just about materials and methods, but about the systems around them. A well-built house matters little if the road leading to it floods every year. A strong bridge helps no one if emergency crews cannot reach it when needed. Cities are networks of connected parts. When one part fails, others can fail with it. Natural disasters reveal these chains of weakness. For example, a hurricane may destroy a power grid. Without power, hospitals cannot operate. Without hospitals, injuries become deaths. The storm itself may last hours, but the damage to systems can last weeks or months. Afterward, leaders often see where their planning fell short. They may move critical services to higher ground, add backup generators, or redesign roads to handle evacuations better. There is a deep link between destruction and innovation. When everything is broken, there is freedom to try new things. Old rules and habits lose their power when people see how they failed. The shock of disaster clears the way for change. This does not mean every change is good. In the rush to rebuild, mistakes can happen. Quick fixes may solve immediate problems but create new ones later. Still, the pressure to improve is real. Builders experiment with new materials, from reinforced concrete to fireproof steel. Planners rethink layouts, adding parks as fire breaks or canals as flood defenses. Step by step, the city becomes stronger. Imagine a coastal town hit by a massive storm. Before the storm, houses sit low and close to the water. The town has a seawall. But it was built decades ago. When the storm comes, the seawall crumbles. Homes fill with water, and families flee to higher ground. In the aftermath, there is grief and anger. People want to return, but they also fear the next storm. Local leaders face a choice. They could rebuild the seawall and put the houses back as they were. Or they could raise the houses on stilts, build a stronger seawall farther out, and create a buffer zone of wetlands to absorb future waves. The first choice is faster and cheaper. The second takes time and money. But if the town chooses the second path, the next storm may cause far less harm. This moment of choice happens again and again after disasters. The idea that catastrophe teaches is old but powerful. It suggests that the worst events hold the seeds of progress. Each disaster adds to a body of knowledge about what fails and what endures. Over centuries, this knowledge shapes our buildings, codes, and cities. People today may take for granted that skyscrapers sway in the wind or that fire escapes line tall buildings. These are not random features. They are answers to past disasters, built into the fabric of modern life. Every rule in a building code has a story behind it, often written in loss. Disasters are brutal teachers. They give their lessons in the form of wrecked homes and lost lives. Yet without these lessons, many weaknesses would stay hidden until they caused even greater harm. The Great Fire of London showed that wood and narrow streets were dangerous. The San Francisco earthquake showed that unreinforced buildings were deadly. Countless other events have taught similar lessons in different places and times. In this way, disasters push societies to face hard truths and to build not just again, but better. Cities have always been shaped by fire. For centuries, people built close together, using wood for houses, shops, and warehouses. Fire was a constant threat, but most towns relied on simple tools like buckets and ladders to fight it. When a fire started, the goal was to stop it from spreading, but in dense urban areas, this was almost impossible. After a great blaze, cities were forced to face the weaknesses in their design and materials. Out of the ashes came new ideas about how to build safer, stronger places to live and work. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 is one of the clearest examples of this pattern. On an October evening, a fire broke out in a small barn on the city's southwest side. High winds carried burning embers through the air. At the time, most buildings were made of wood, including sidewalks and even some streets. The fire spread quickly, jumping from block to block. For nearly 2 days, flames consumed the city. By the time it ended, 17,000 buildings were gone. About 100,000 people were left homeless. Entire neighborhoods disappeared overnight. The scale of the destruction shocked the country. In the weeks that followed, Chicago leaders faced a difficult choice. They could rebuild quickly using the same materials and methods, or they could change how the city was built. They chose change. The city introduced strict fire codes. Builders were now required to use brick, stone, and iron instead of wood in many structures. These materials slowed the spread of fire and gave people more time to escape. Fire escapes became common on tall buildings. The fire department also grew more organized. Modern firefighting systems, including fire hydrants and horse-drawn steam engines, became part of the city's defenses. These changes did not happen overnight, but the memory of the Great Fire pushed them forward year after year. This shift from wood to more durable materials spread beyond Chicago. Other cities saw what had happened and wanted to avoid a similar disaster. Concrete and steel became standard in urban construction. These materials did not burn like wood, and they allowed for taller, stronger buildings. The rise of the skyscraper was tied to this change. Without steel frames and fire-resistant designs, the modern skyline would not exist. Over time, entire urban landscapes transformed. Streets widened to create natural fire breaks. Water systems expanded to supply hydrants. Even the way cities were planned began to reflect the lessons learned from massive fires. London had faced its own turning point 2 centuries earlier. In 1666, the Great Fire of London destroyed a huge portion of the city. The fire burned for 4 days, fueled by wooden houses built close together along narrow streets. After the smoke cleared, leaders realized the city had to rebuild in a way that would prevent another catastrophe. They banned wooden construction in central London and required the use of brick and stone. Streets were widened, and new rules controlled how close buildings could be to one another. These decisions marked the start of a fireproofing revolution. Over time, other European cities adopted similar rules, shaping how modern urban areas look today. Fire safety, however, is not only about the materials used. It is also about design, regulation, and maintenance. Even with modern codes, failure can occur when safety rules are ignored or when older buildings are not updated. The Grenfell Tower fire in London in 2017 is a painful example of this. Grenfell Tower was a high-rise public housing block. A small kitchen fire started in one apartment. In theory, the building's design should have contained the fire in that unit. Instead, the flames spread rapidly up the outside of the building, fueled by the cladding material on its exterior. Within hours, the entire tower was engulfed. 72 people lost their lives. Investigations revealed serious flaws. The cladding was not fire-resistant. Safety checks had been missed or poorly done. Residents had raised concerns about fire hazards, but their warnings were not taken seriously. Grenfell showed that modern cities face not just the challenge of building safely, but also of maintaining safety over time. A building can meet codes when first built, but become dangerous years later if updates are neglected. The disaster led to major reviews of fire safety rules in the United Kingdom and beyond. It reminded city planners and regulators that even advanced materials and systems cannot protect people if oversight fails. The move from wood to concrete and steel was one of the most important changes in urban history. Wood was cheap and easy to work with, which is why it dominated construction for centuries. But it burns quickly, and in a dense city, one small fire can become a massive one. Concrete does not burn, and it can be molded into many shapes. Steel provides strength and flexibility, which is especially important in tall buildings. Together, these materials made it possible to design structures that are both safe and ambitious. Modern skyscrapers rely on steel frames and reinforced concrete cores. Fire-resistant walls and floors slow the spread of flames, giving firefighters time to act and people time to escape. Imagine a modern city block with office towers and apartment buildings. Below the streets, there are water mains feeding hydrants. Inside the buildings, sprinklers are ready to activate if a fire starts. Emergency exits are clearly marked. These features seem ordinary today, but they are the result of centuries of trial and error. In older cities, you can still see traces of the past. A narrow alley may mark the path of a long-burned neighborhood. A stone building may stand alone in a sea of newer concrete towers. Each layer of the city tells a story of fires fought and lessons learned. The pattern is always the same. A fire reveals weaknesses in design, materials, or systems. People respond with anger and grief. Then, slowly, they rebuild with new rules. The changes may seem small at first. A wider street here, a safer material there. But over decades, these choices shape the entire city. The Great Chicago Fire forced a young city to glow up quickly. London's fireproofing laws after 1666 created a model for other cities to follow. The Grenfell Tower tragedy showed that even in the modern era, vigilance is necessary. Fire may be ancient, but the fight to control it is ongoing. Every blaze leaves behind more than ash. It leaves lessons about how to build cities that are not just beautiful, but safe for those who live within them. When the ground moves, everything built upon it is tested. Earthquakes push and pull buildings in different directions at once. Walls crack, floors shift, and foundations twist. Many early structures were designed only to carry weight downward. They could stand for centuries under normal conditions, but failed when horizontal forces struck. Seismic forces attack a building's weakest points, revealing whether it can bend without breaking. Modern earthquake engineering grew from studying these failures and learning how to make structures survive the shaking rather than resist it rigidly. The San Francisco earthquake of 1906 was a turning point. It struck before dawn, shaking the city with a force few had imagined possible. Buildings collapsed instantly. Fires started when gas lines snapped, and because water mains also broke, firefighters had little to stop the flames. Much of the city center burned to the ground after the shaking ended. The destruction shocked engineers into action. They studied which structures fell and which held up under the stress. One pattern stood out. Buildings with steel frames performed better than those made only of brick or stone. Steel could flex when the ground moved, absorbing some of the energy rather than cracking apart. This insight changed the way cities approached construction in earthquake zones. New building codes began to appear, first in California and then in other places with high seismic risk. The codes required stronger connections between walls and foundations. They limited building heights unless designers used materials and methods proven to resist earthquakes. Over time, engineers learned to design structures that worked with the Earth's motion instead of against it. Flexible frames, lighter materials, and reinforced joints became standard features in areas known for seismic activity. Japan faced a similar turning point with the Kobe earthquake in 1995. The quake struck a modern city with highways, ports, and dense neighborhoods. Many buildings collapsed, and elevated highways crumbled onto the streets below. Rescue crews struggled to move through the wreckage. Despite Japan's long history with earthquakes, Kobe showed that even modern infrastructure could fail without constant updates to standards and designs. The disaster pushed Japan to become a leader in seismic engineering. Researchers analyzed every broken beam and toppled column to understand how forces had traveled through the structures. Their work led to stricter codes, better construction materials, and a deeper focus on how entire cities respond to earthquakes, not just individual buildings. One major innovation was base isolation. Instead of anchoring a building directly to the ground, engineers place it on flexible bearings or sliding pads. When the earth moves, the base of the building can shift while the structure above remains relatively still. This system does not stop the earthquake, but it greatly reduces the energy transferred upward. Hospitals, bridges, and high-rise buildings around the world now use base isolation to protect both people and equipment during seismic events. Another key development has been the use of shock-absorbing materials. Some buildings include dampers, devices filled with fluid or special metals that act like the shock absorbers in a car. When the building sways, these dampers take in some of the motion, reducing stress on the frame. Engineers also design walls and joints to deform in controlled ways, allowing energy to dissipate without causing total collapse. The goal is not to make a building perfectly rigid, but to let it move safely, protecting lives even if repairs are needed later. Tokyo today shows how far seismic resilience has come. The city sits in one of the most active earthquake zones on Earth, yet it is filled with skyscrapers, subways, and dense neighborhoods. Modern buildings in Tokyo combine flexible steel frames, base isolation, and damping systems to handle strong quakes. Emergency plans guide evacuations, and public education ensures people know how to respond when the ground shakes. After each earthquake, even small ones, engineers inspect structures and update standards if needed. This constant cycle of learning and improvement keeps the city prepared for future events. Imagine standing in a high-rise office during a major quake. The floor beneath you begins to sway. Cabinets rattle, lights swing, but the building stays intact. Below, the base isolation system slides a few inches as the ground moves. Inside the walls, dampers absorb the shaking like cushions. Stairwells and exits remain clear because the frame was designed to flex rather than crack. When the shaking stops, people walk out safely. The building may need repairs, but it is still standing because every part was designed with seismic forces in mind. These advances did not come all at once. Each major earthquake revealed new weaknesses. San Francisco taught the value of steel framing. Kobe pushed engineers to study not just materials, but also urban systems, roads, bridges, power lines that keep cities running after disasters. Smaller quakes in Japan, Chile, and California over the past decades have added more data, leading to constant refinement of designs and codes. The science behind seismic resilience blends physics, engineering, and real-world observation. Researchers use shake tables at large platforms that simulate earthquakes to test models of buildings. Computer simulations now allow engineers to see how complex structures will respond to different magnitudes and wave patterns. This research turns each disaster into a source of knowledge. When a building fails, investigators trace the chain of events back to the first crack or broken joint. They ask whether better materials, different shapes, or improved connections could have changed the outcome. Those answers feed into the next generation of building codes. In many cities, older buildings remain the greatest challenge. Structures built before modern codes often lack the flexibility and strength needed to survive strong quakes. Retrofitting, adding steel braces, reinforcing walls, or installing base isolators under existing foundations has become a major focus. It is expensive, but the cost of inaction can be far greater when a quake strikes. Schools, hospitals, and emergency centers often receive priority because their failure would harm the most people. The story of seismic engineering shows how humans adapt to forces beyond their control. Earthquakes cannot be prevented, but their impact can be managed through knowledge and design. From the rubble of San Francisco to the lessons of Kobe and the innovations in Tokyo. Each step forward comes from studying what broke and imagining how it could bend instead. The result is a built environment that accepts the Earth's power, yet protects the lives lived within it. Water has always shaped where people live. Rivers, lakes, and coasts provide food, trade routes, and fertile soil. But water also brings danger. Floods can sweep through towns without warning. Storm surges can rise higher than walls or levees. Hurricanes can tear apart buildings and wash entire neighborhoods away. Over time, communities have learned to design for these threats, but each disaster adds new lessons about what works and what fails. The Galveston hurricane of 1900 remains one of the deadliest natural disasters in U.S. history. A powerful storm hit the Texas coast with little warning. Galveston sat just above sea level, and its streets were lined with wooden houses. When the storm surge came, it covered the island. Homes floated off their foundations. Entire blocks were destroyed. Thousands of people died. In the aftermath, leaders realized the city could not simply rebuild as before. They constructed a massive seawall to block future storm surges. They also raised the level of many buildings and streets, sometimes by more than a dozen feet. This was one of the first major efforts to use engineering to fight coastal flooding. The changes did not make Galveston safe from every storm, but they greatly reduced the risk of total destruction. More than a century later, Hurricane Katrina showed how even large modern cities can be vulnerable. When Katrina struck in 2005, New Orleans faced both high winds and a massive storm surge. The city depends on a system of levees and floodwalls to keep water out, because much of it sits below sea level. During the storm, several of these levees failed. Water poured into neighborhoods, filling homes and streets. People were trapped on rooftops, waiting for rescue. Entire sections of the city were submerged for days. The disaster killed more than 1,000 people and displaced hundreds of thousands. The levee failures revealed serious weaknesses. Some walls had been poorly built or maintained. In other places, designs underestimated the force of a major storm. After the flooding, engineers and planners completely rethought the city's defenses. They built stronger levees and added floodgates to block storm surges. Pumping stations were upgraded to remove water faster after heavy rain. These changes aimed not just to repair the damage, but to create a system that could handle future storms that might be even stronger. Rebuilding New Orleans also raised questions about where and how people should live. In some low-lying areas, the damage was so severe that rebuilding in place made little sense. Some neighborhoods were rebuilt with homes on elevated foundations, raising living spaces above expected flood levels. Other areas were turned into parks or open spaces that could safely flood without endangering lives. These choices reflected a new understanding. Fighting water requires both physical defenses and smart planning about land use. This challenge is not unique to the United States. Flooding disasters are becoming more common around the world. In 2021, heavy rain caused catastrophic flooding in western Germany. Rivers overflowed, washing away bridges, roads, and entire villages. More than 70,000 people had to leave their homes. Many never returned. The destruction showed that even wealthy nations with modern infrastructure are not safe from extreme weather. Climate change plays a role here. Warmer air holds more moisture, which means heavier rainfall. Rising sea levels make storm surges more dangerous. What used to be a rare event may now happen every decade or even every few years. As storms grow stronger and floods more frequent, modern solutions have become essential. Elevated foundations are one of the simplest but most effective tools. In coastal areas, new homes are often built on stilts or raised platforms. This allows water to flow underneath during floods instead of pushing through walls. In places with tidal flooding, even a few feet of elevation can protect a home. Retrofitting older buildings is harder, but some communities have programs to lift existing structures to safer heights. Green infrastructure is another powerful approach. Instead of relying only on concrete barriers, cities use natural systems to manage water. Wetlands, mangroves, and restored riverbanks can absorb storm surges and slow floodwaters. Permeable pavements let rain soak into the ground rather than rushing into storm drains. Parks and green roofs hold water during heavy rainfall, reducing pressure on drainage systems. These solutions have the added benefit of improving air quality and providing habitat for wildlife. They work with nature rather than against it, making them more sustainable over time. In some cases, no amount of engineering can fully protect a place. Managed retreat becomes the last option. This strategy involves moving homes and businesses out of the most dangerous areas. It is a difficult and often painful process. People may have deep ties to their land, and relocation can disrupt communities. However, when the cost of constant rebuilding becomes too high, retreat can save lives and money in the long run. After repeated floods, some towns have been relocated entirely. The old land is then returned to wetlands or open space, creating a natural buffer against future storms. Consider a small coastal town facing rising seas and frequent hurricanes. At first, the town builds higher seawalls and installs pumps to handle flooding. As storms worsen, the defenses require constant repair. Insurance rates climb, and residents face growing financial risk. Eventually, leaders may decide that certain low-lying streets cannot be saved. They offer buyouts to homeowners and help them move to higher ground. Over time, the waterfront becomes a park that can flood safely while the town's core moves inland. Though painful, this transition can give the community a future rather than trapping it in a cycle of disaster and recovery. Modern flood protection blends old and new ideas. Seawalls and levees still play a role, especially in cities where critical infrastructure must stay dry. But engineers now design them with higher safety margins and stronger materials. At the same time, green spaces, elevated homes, and flexible land use plans add layers of resilience. Technology helps too. Sensors track water levels in real time. Computer models predict how storms will move and which neighborhoods are most at risk. This information allows emergency managers to evacuate people early and deploy resources where they are needed most. The Galveston seawall marked the beginning of a new way of thinking about coastal safety. Katrina forced a modern city to admit that its defenses were not enough. The floods in Germany showed that even inland regions face growing danger as climate patterns change. Each event has added to the shared knowledge of how to live with water. Elevated foundations keep families safe inside their homes. Wetlands and green spaces slow the rush of floodwaters. Managed retreat acknowledges the limits of human control. Together, these strategies form a toolkit for survival in a world where storms and floods are becoming stronger and more frequent. Building codes exist because every building is a promise. When someone walks into a house, office, or school, they trust that it will not collapse in an earthquake, burn too quickly in a fire, or flood with the first heavy rain. Codes turn that trust into rules. They set minimum standards for how buildings are designed, built, and maintained. Without them, safety would depend on each builder's choices, and history has shown how dangerous that can be. Disasters have repeatedly proven that codes save lives, but only when they are strong and followed consistently. In earthquake-prone places like California and Japan, codes are a frontline defense. Earthquakes cannot be stopped, but the damage they cause can be reduced. California learned this through painful experience. After the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, new rules were introduced, but many older buildings remained vulnerable. Over the decades, each major quake revealed more weaknesses. After the 1989 Loma Prieta quake and the 1994 Northridge quake, California expanded its requirements. Today, new buildings must have reinforced frames, flexible joints, and deep foundations that can handle lateral shaking. These rules have helped modern buildings perform far better than those built before strict codes existed. Japan faces even greater seismic risk. The country sits on multiple tectonic plates, and earthquakes there are frequent and often powerful. After the 1995 Kobe earthquake, which killed thousands and caused widespread destruction, Japan launched one of the most ambitious retrofitting programs in the world. Engineers inspected older buildings and reinforced them with steel braces, shock absorbers, and base isolation systems. Schools, hospitals, and public buildings received priority upgrades because their failure would endanger many lives at once. Today, Japan's codes are among the strictest in the world, and Tokyo's skyline reflects decades of learning. Many of its tallest towers are built to sway with the motion of the earth rather than fight against it. Hurricane-prone regions have also developed specialized codes. Florida, for example, has some of the toughest wind load requirements in the United States. After Hurricane Andrew devastated the state in 1992, investigators found that poor construction practices had made the damage far worse. Roofs were not properly anchored, windows lacked impact protection, walls were not tied securely to foundations. In response, Florida rewrote its building codes to address these failures. Today, new homes must have hurricane straps to hold roofs in place, shatter-resistant glass, and other features designed to survive extreme winds. The Caribbean islands face similar challenges. Many now require buildings to be elevated on strong foundations to reduce storm surge damage, and they enforce strict standards for materials and design. But minimum standards alone are not enough. Codes are designed as baselines, the bare minimum required for safety. In practice, this means that a building built to code may survive a typical disaster but fail during an extreme event. As storms grow stronger and earthquakes strike with unpredictable force, meeting the minimum is often no longer sufficient. Resilient design goes beyond compliance. It asks not just whether a building will meet today's rules, but whether it will still protect people decades from now. Retrofitting is a clear example of this philosophy. In California, engineers continue to identify older structures that were built before modern seismic codes. These buildings, especially unreinforced masonry structures, are highly vulnerable. Retrofitting involves adding steel frames, strengthening connections, and sometimes installing base isolation systems under existing foundations. This work is expensive and disruptive, but it is far less costly than the loss of life and property after a major quake. Japan's retrofitting efforts after Kobe followed the same logic. Instead of waiting for the next disaster, they acted preemptively to reduce future risk. Resilient design also considers flexibility. A rigid structure may meet today's codes but fail when conditions change. For example, a coastal city may face higher sea levels in 20 years due to climate change. A building designed with adaptability in mind might include foundations that can be raised later, or walls that can be reinforced as needed. This approach treats buildings as evolving systems rather than fixed objects. It acknowledges that both the natural environment and our understanding of hazards will continue to change. Imagine a hospital built on the edge of a hurricane-prone coastline. The minimum code might require reinforced windows and backup generators. A resilient design would go further. It might place critical equipment on upper floors instead of basements, so floodwaters cannot reach them. It might add extra generator capacity to handle longer outages. The building might be shaped to deflect wind rather than simply resist it. These choices cost more upfront, but they ensure that the hospital remains functional during and after a disaster, when it is most needed. Preparedness goes hand in hand with codes. Even the strongest building cannot prevent harm if the people inside do not know what to do during a disaster. Japan invests heavily in public education and regular drills. Schools practice earthquake evacuations. Businesses rehearse response plans. These efforts mean that when a quake hits, people act quickly and calmly. In hurricane zones, preparedness includes evacuation planning, emergency shelters, and early warning systems. A well-built home matters. But so does knowing when to leave it behind. Technology is making it easier to combine building codes with real-time monitoring. Sensors can now track the health of a structure during an earthquake or storm. Engineers can see which parts of a building are under stress and decide whether it is safe to occupy after the event. This data feeds back into future designs and updates to codes. In this way, each disaster becomes part of a cycle of improvement. Some of the greatest challenges come from older buildings. Many cities are full of structures built before modern codes existed. These buildings are often the most vulnerable, yet they may house large numbers of people. Upgrading them requires political will and financial investment. Governments sometimes offer grants or tax incentives to encourage owners to retrofit their properties. Without these efforts, entire neighborhoods can become pockets of extreme risk. Strong building codes represent collective memory. They contain lessons learned from past failures. Every requirement in a code, from the depth of the foundation to the spacing of nails in a roof, reflects a disaster that once caused harm. But codes are only effective if they keep pace with changing threats. Climate change, urban growth, and aging infrastructure all push the limits of what past rules can handle. By going beyond compliance and embracing resilience, communities can prepare for a future where disasters will test not just individual buildings, but entire systems of safety and survival. When a disaster strikes, the destruction is immediate, but rebuilding takes time. In the first days, people focus on survival and rescue. Once the danger passes, attention shifts to recovery. Communities want to restore what was lost, and leaders face intense pressure to act quickly. Businesses want to reopen. Families want to return to their homes, and politicians want to show progress. The faster buildings go up, the sooner life can seem normal again. But speed can come at a cost. If rebuilding focuses only on appearances, the same weaknesses that caused the destruction in the first place remain. The tension between rebuilding fast and rebuilding strong is one of the hardest challenges after a disaster. After Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017, many Caribbean islands face this problem. Winds flattened houses, tore off roofs, and shredded power lines. Tourism, a main source of income for many islands, collapsed overnight. Governments and aid groups rushed to repair hotels, airports, and roads. In some places, crews patched damaged buildings with the same materials that had failed during the storms. These repairs made towns look whole again, at least from the outside. Visitors could return, and local economies could start moving. But many of these cosmetic repairs did little to improve safety. When the next hurricane came, the same structures were likely to fail again. In some communities, rebuilding differently was possible but slower. Reinforcing a roof with hurricane straps or using impact-resistant windows required more planning and money. Elevating a house on strong concrete pillars took even longer. For families living in tents or crowded shelters, waiting months or years for safer homes felt unbearable. Many chose the quickest option, even if it meant remaining vulnerable. This cycle of destruction and repair is common in hurricane-prone regions. It highlights how economic and social pressures can push people toward short-term solutions instead of long-term resilience. Superstorm Sandy in 2012 showed a different path. The storm struck the U.S. East Coast, flooding neighborhoods in New York and New Jersey. In the early weeks, there was frustration at the slow pace of recovery. Damaged subway tunnels stayed closed. Whole sections of the coastline sat in ruins. For many residents, the delays felt like failure. But those delays gave planners time to think carefully about the future. Instead of rushing to replace what had been lost, officials studied how and where rebuilding should happen. In some areas, they elevated homes above flood levels. In others, they converted land to parks or wetlands that could absorb future storm surges. Infrastructure like power stations and hospitals were redesigned to stay operational during floods. The slower pace also allowed for public discussion. Communities debated whether certain areas should be rebuilt at all. These conversations were difficult, especially for people whose families had lived there for generations. In the end, some neighborhoods moved inland or accepted new building restrictions. Why painful? These choices made the region more prepared for future storms. Sandy demonstrated that taking time to plan can lead to smarter rebuilding, even if it means living with temporary hardship. Temporary housing plays a critical role in this process. When people have safe, stable places to live after a disaster, they can focus on long-term recovery rather than immediate survival. Japan has developed a model for this approach. After major earthquakes, the government quickly sets up large parks filled with heated tents or prefab homes. These temporary communities are simple but well organized. Families have private spaces, shared kitchens, and reliable heat and electricity. Because their basic needs are met, they do not have to rush back into unsafe buildings. This breathing room allows engineers and planners to assess damage carefully and design stronger replacements. For example, after the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, thousands of people lived in temporary housing for months while entire towns were relocated to higher ground. It was not easy, but it prevented hasty rebuilding in areas that would flood again. By the time permanent structures were built, they reflected new knowledge about tsunami risk and seismic safety. This strategy required patience and resources, but it avoided repeating past mistakes. The opposite happens when temporary solutions are lacking. In some disaster zones, families have nowhere to go except damaged houses. With no other option, they patch holes in the roof or prop up leaning walls just enough to move back in. These structures may look stable, but they can collapse in the next storm or quake. Without safe alternatives, people are trapped in dangerous cycles. Temporary housing is not just about comfort. It buys time for thoughtful decisions and careful construction. Imagine a coastal town where a hurricane has destroyed half the homes. The streets are filled with debris. Families sleep in their cars or under tarps. Local leaders must decide how to proceed. If they focus only on speed, they might clear the rubble and rebuild houses on the same low foundations, using the same weak materials. Within a year, the town will look whole again. But when the next storm arrives, those homes will be swept away once more. If, instead, they invest in temporary housing, families can wait safely while engineers redesign the town. The new homes may be elevated with stronger roofs and reinforced walls. The streets may be rearranged to create better drainage. Parks or wetlands might replace the most flood-prone blocks. The process will take longer, but the result will protect lives for decades. The choice between speed and resilience is rarely simple. Politicians face voters who expect quick results. Businesses depend on foot traffic and cannot survive long closures. Families want to return to familiar routines. These pressures create powerful incentives to rebuild fast, even if it means repeating old mistakes. On the other hand, delays can be deeply frustrating. People living in temporary shelters for months or years may lose patience and trust in the system. Balancing these needs requires clear communication and strong leadership. Financial factors add another layer of complexity. Insurance payouts, government aid, and private investment all shape how rebuilding happens. Sometimes funding rules encourage quick, cheap repairs rather than lasting improvements. After a disaster, money may flow in large amounts at first, but dry up later. This can push communities to act before resources disappear. Aligning funding with long-term safety goals is essential, but it is often difficult in practice. Each disaster tests not only buildings, but also the systems that support recovery. Hurricanes Irma and Maria revealed how fragile infrastructure and rushed repairs can leave entire islands vulnerable. Superstorm Sandy showed how slowing down can create opportunities for smarter planning. Japan's use of temporary housing demonstrated the value of giving people space and time to rebuild wisely. Across these examples, one truth stands out: rebuilding the same way guarantees the same outcome. Without change, disasters will keep repeating their lessons, and communities will keep paying the price. The way buildings are made is changing. For centuries, stone, wood, and later concrete and steel have been the main materials used for construction. These materials are strong and familiar, but they have limits when it comes to disasters. As cities grow, and storms, earthquakes, and floods become more intense, engineers are looking for new ways to build. Innovative materials and technology are opening doors to structures that are not only stronger, but also smarter and more sustainable. One breakthrough comes from fiber-reinforced polymers, or FRPs. These materials are lightweight but extremely strong. They can wrap around existing columns, beams, or walls to make older buildings safer without having to tear them down. This process is often used in retrofitting, especially in earthquake zones. Imagine an old school building with brick walls built before modern seismic codes. Instead of demolishing it, engineers can cover the walls with fiber-reinforced sheets. These sheets act like a flexible skin that holds the structure together during shaking. The upgrade takes less time and costs less than a full rebuild, while giving the building new life and protecting the people inside. Cross-laminated timber, or CLT, is another material gaining attention. At first, using wood in earthquake-prone areas might seem risky, given how fires shaped past urban disasters. But CLT is not like traditional wood. It is made by layering planks of timber in alternating directions and bonding them under pressure. The result is a material that is strong, stable, and resistant to warping. It is also much lighter than concrete or steel. In an earthquake, this lighter weight reduces the forces acting on the building. CLT can be used to construct mid-rise and even high-rise buildings that meet strict seismic standards. It also has a lower environmental impact since wood stores carbon rather than producing it, as cement does during production. Sustainable materials are becoming more important as cities aim to reduce their environmental footprint while improving resilience. Bamboo is one example. In many parts of the world, bamboo grows quickly and can be harvested without harming the environment. Despite its lightweight appearance, bamboo has a strength-to-weight ratio similar to steel. It can be used in structural elements, especially in regions where it grows naturally. Recycled materials are also being integrated into modern construction. Concrete made with recycled aggregates or plastics reduces waste while still providing durability. These approaches link disaster resilience with sustainability, showing that safety and environmental responsibility can go hand in hand. Technology is transforming not just what we build with, but how we design and plan. Building Information Modeling, or BIM, is a digital tool that allows engineers and architects to create detailed 3D models of a structure before construction begins. BIM is more than just a drawing. It can simulate how a building will respond to earthquakes, floods, or hurricanes. Designers can test different layouts, materials, and reinforcements virtually, spotting weaknesses before they become real-world problems. For example, a city planning a new hospital in a flood-prone area can use BIM to model storm surges and see how water would move through the site. The design can then be adjusted to raise critical areas or reroute drainage systems. This kind of foresight saves both money and lives. Some innovations go even further by making materials self-sufficient. One of the most promising is self-repairing concrete. Traditional concrete develops cracks over time, especially in harsh environments. These cracks let in water, which can rust steel reinforcement bars and weaken the structure. Self-repairing concrete contains bacteria that become active when exposed to moisture. The bacteria produce limestone, which fills the cracks naturally. This process extends the life of the structure and reduces maintenance costs. Bridges, tunnels, and seawalls built with this concrete can withstand more stress while needing fewer repairs. Modular and prefabricated construction is another powerful tool for resilience. In this method, buildings are made in sections, or modules, in a factory. The modules are then transported to the site and assembled quickly. This approach has several advantages after disasters. First, it allows for rapid rebuilding. Instead of waiting months for on-site construction, entire homes, schools, or hospitals can be put together in days or weeks. Second, factory-controlled conditions mean higher quality and fewer errors. After a hurricane or earthquake, when demand for housing spikes and skilled labor may be scarce, modular construction can meet urgent needs without sacrificing safety. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many countries used modular techniques to build emergency hospitals. In China, for example, entire facilities were completed in less than 2 weeks. These hospitals were not just temporary tents. They included full plumbing, electricity, and medical systems. The speed of construction came from pre-made modules that were simply connected on-site. This same approach can be applied after natural disasters. A city hit by a major flood could quickly deploy modular housing for displaced families while permanent rebuilding plans take shape. The temporary structures would be safe, functional, and ready for immediate use. Consider a coastal region recovering from a hurricane. Roads are washed out, and thousands of people have lost their homes. Traditional rebuilding would take months, leaving families in crowded shelters. Using modular techniques, emergency housing units arrive by truck or barge. Crews assemble them in open fields or parking lots, providing secure, dry shelter within days. At the same time, planners use BIM to design permanent neighborhoods with elevated foundations, proper drainage, and green infrastructure. As these plans move forward, the temporary units can be reused elsewhere, reducing waste and speeding future responses. Combining innovative materials with modern technology creates new possibilities. A retrofitted school might have fiber-reinforced columns, cross-laminated timber walls, and self-repairing concrete floors. Its design could be tested virtually in BIM simulations, ensuring it performs well in earthquakes and floods. If damaged, modular sections could be replaced quickly without closing the whole building. This kind of integrated thinking moves beyond the old pattern of building, breaking, and rebuilding. It creates structures that can adapt and endure. Challenges remain. New materials and technologies can be expensive or unfamiliar to local builders. Training, supply chains, and regulations must catch up. But as disasters grow more frequent and intense, the cost of sticking with outdated methods becomes higher. The future of construction lies in combining strength, speed, and reaction. And sustainability. Fiber-reinforced polymers give new life to old buildings. Cross-laminated timber offers a modern take on a natural material. Self-repairing concrete extends the lifespan of critical infrastructure. Modular construction provides shelter and services when time matters most. Together, these innovations show that resilience is not only about surviving the next disaster, but also about building in ways that transform how communities live and recover. The world is facing more disasters than ever before, and they are growing stronger. Events that were once rare now happen with alarming regularity. Storms bring heavier rain, fires burn hotter and faster, and floods reach places that were once considered safe. The financial and human costs of these disasters are staggering, and climate change is a driving force behind this shift. Rising temperatures, changing weather patterns, and higher sea levels amplify existing risks, leaving cities and communities exposed in ways they have never been before. The scale of recent disasters shows how much has changed. During Australia's 2019 and 2020 bushfire season, flames tore through forests, towns, and farmland. The fires burned for months, fueled by extreme heat and drought. Entire ecosystems were destroyed and millions of animals perished. Smoke spread across the continent and even reached other countries. The economic losses reached an estimated $70 billion, but the true cost went beyond money. Families lost their homes, and entire communities were displaced. Fire seasons have always been part of life in Australia, but their size and intensity in recent years reflect a changing climate. Longer dry periods and hotter summers create conditions where small sparks turn into unstoppable infernos. In the United States, the 2017 hurricane season was one of the most destructive on record. 3 massive storms, Harvey, Irma, and Maria, struck in quick succession. Hurricane Harvey dumped historic amounts of rain on Texas, flooding entire neighborhoods. Irma swept through the Caribbean and Florida, leaving destruction across multiple islands. Maria hit Puerto Rico with such force that the island's power grid collapsed. For weeks, many residents had no electricity or clean water. Combined, these storms caused an estimated $139 billion in damages. The scale of this season showed how modern hurricanes can overwhelm even well-prepared regions. Warmer ocean waters provide more fuel for storms, making them stronger and more destructive. Just a few years later, Texas faced another disaster of a very different kind. In February 2021, a winter storm brought extreme cold to a region unprepared for such conditions. Power plants froze, and the electrical grid failed. Millions of people were left without heat, light, or safe water for days. Burst pipes flooded homes and businesses. Roads became impassable. The storm caused an estimated $295 billion in damages, making it one of the costliest weather events in U.S. history. While cold snaps are not new, this storm's intensity and duration were unusual. Scientists have linked such extremes to shifts in global climate patterns, showing how warming can create both heat waves and severe cold events. Smaller nations face equally devastating impacts, often with fewer resources to respond. In 2017, Cyclone Winston struck Fiji with winds strong enough to flatten entire villages. 62% of the country's population was affected. Many coastal communities were wiped out completely, leaving families without shelter, food, or clean water. Rebuilding has been slow, and some villages have been relocated inland to escape future storms. For island nations like Fiji, rising sea levels and more powerful cyclones threaten their very existence. When a single storm can affect most of a nation's people, recovery becomes a global concern. Climate change acts as a multiplier for these disasters. It does not create storms, fires, or earthquakes directly, but it makes them worse. Warmer air holds more moisture, leading to heavier rainfall and flooding. Rising sea levels allow storm surges to reach farther inland, damaging homes and infrastructure. Hotter temperatures dry out forests, turning them into fuel for massive wildfires. At the same time, growing urban populations place more people in harm's way. Poor planning and weak infrastructure magnify the impact when disasters strike. A neighborhood built in a floodplain or on unstable slopes becomes a trap during extreme weather. Consider a coastal city with outdated drainage systems. In the past, heavy rain might have caused temporary street flooding, but nothing catastrophic. As the climate warms, storms bring much more rain in shorter periods. The drainage system cannot keep up, and water flows into homes and businesses. At the same time, higher sea levels make it harder for floodwaters to recede. What was once a minor inconvenience becomes a major disaster, with long-term damage to buildings and public health. Without adaptation, these cities face repeated crises with each new storm. Adaptive urban planning is becoming essential. This means designing cities with the understanding that future conditions will not match the past. Building higher seawalls alone is not enough. Instead, planners must think in layers of protection. In flood-prone areas, Homes can be built on elevated foundations. Parks and wetlands can serve as natural buffers, absorbing excess water during heavy storms. Critical infrastructure like hospitals and power stations should be placed on higher ground or protected by barriers. Roads and bridges must be designed to stay functional during extreme events, ensuring that rescue and evacuation are possible. Technology can help cities prepare. Advanced climate models can predict which areas are most at risk from future floods, fires, or heat waves. With this information, planners can direct growth to safer locations and avoid placing new neighborhoods in high-risk zones. Early warning systems give people time to evacuate before disaster strikes. For example, sensors along rivers can track water levels and send alerts when flooding is imminent. These tools only work if they are combined with public education and clear emergency plans. People need to know where to go, what to bring, and how to act when warnings come. Economic factors play a major role in adaptation. Wealthier cities can invest in modern infrastructure, while poorer communities often lack the resources to prepare. This creates an uneven landscape of risk. When disasters hit, vulnerable populations suffer the most. International cooperation is critical to closing this gap. Climate change is a global problem, and its effects cross borders. A flood that displaces tens of thousands in one country can send shockwaves through entire regions as people migrate in search of safety. The choices made today will shape how cities face future disasters. If planning continues to rely on outdated assumptions, the gap between risk and readiness will grow. Buildings designed for yesterday's climate will fail under tomorrow's storms. Roads built without considering higher flood levels will wash away again and again. By contrast, adaptive design anticipates change. It treats every building and street as part of a system built to flex and evolve. In this way, cities can survive even as the threats they face continue to rise. The numbers tell a clear story. 70 billion lost to fires in Australia, 139 billion from a single hurricane season in the United States, 295 billion from a winter storm in Texas. Entire villages destroyed in Fiji. These are not isolated events. They are signals of a world where disasters are becoming more frequent and severe. Climate change is not just a distant problem. It is here now, reshaping the way communities must think about safety, design, and survival. Disasters do not respect borders. A storm that forms over warm ocean water can strike several countries in just a few days. An earthquake in one region can disrupt global supply chains. Rising seas affect islands, ports, and coastal cities across continents. Because these threats are shared, the solutions must also be shared. No single nation has all the answers. By working together, countries can exchange ideas, technologies, and strategies to reduce risk and protect lives. International networks have emerged to support this kind of collaboration. The Inogen Alliance is one example. It connects environmental and engineering experts from around the world. Through this network, lessons learned in one place can guide decisions in another. For instance, a city facing frequent floods might learn from another that has already built advanced drainage systems or restored wetlands to manage stormwater. This exchange of knowledge saves time and money while preventing repeated mistakes. Instead of starting from scratch after every disaster, communities can build on proven practices. Flood prevention is an area where shared knowledge has had a major impact. Countries in Northern Europe, such as the Netherlands, have centuries of experience with dikes, levees, and storm surge barriers. Their expertise has informed projects in places as different as New Orleans and Vietnam. The Netherlands, for example, developed movable floodgates that can rise during storms and lower afterward, protecting harbors without blocking everyday boat traffic. When New Orleans rebuilt its defenses after Hurricane Katrina, engineers studied these systems closely. While no two cities are identical, the basic principles of water control can be adapted to local conditions. In this way, solutions travel across borders while still being customized to fit each landscape. Seismic retrofitting offers another example of international exchange. Japan has long been a leader in earthquake engineering, developing technologies like base isolation and energy-dissipating dampers. After major quakes, Japanese engineers share their findings with other nations through conferences, research papers, and training programs. California has adopted many of these techniques, strengthening its own building codes and retrofitting older structures. In return, U.S. researchers have contributed to studies on materials and simulation tools that benefit Japan and other earthquake-prone regions. This back and forth creates a global pool of knowledge that grows with each disaster. Coastal hazard management also depends on collaboration. Rising seas and stronger storms threaten coastlines around the world. Engineers, urban planners, and scientists are now working together across countries to test different approaches. Some focus on hard barriers like seawalls and breakwaters, while others emphasize natural defenses such as mangroves and marshes. The best solutions often combine both. A seawall might protect critical infrastructure like a power plant, while wetlands reduce wave energy and provide space for excess water. Sharing data on tides, erosion rates, and storm patterns helps coastal communities make informed decisions about which strategies will work best. The Clifton to Tangoyo Coastal Hazard Strategy in New Zealand illustrates how international ideas can be adapted to local needs. This project addresses a stretch of coastline facing severe erosion and flooding risks. Instead of relying only on barriers, planners developed a long-term vision that includes managed retreat. This means gradually moving homes, businesses, and roads away from the most dangerous areas. The strategy was shaped by global research but tailored to the unique geography and culture of the region. Community meetings were central to the process. Residents helped decide how retreat would happen and what new uses the old land would have, such as parks or natural reserves. By involving the public, planners built trust and ensured the plan reflected local values. Managed retreat is a concept that many countries are now exploring. It recognizes that in some places, the cost of defending land is simply too high. Rather than fighting the ocean forever, communities step back to safer ground. This approach requires careful planning and strong communication. People must be supported financially and emotionally as they leave homes that may have been in their families for generations. Shared experiences from other nations help guide these difficult transitions. For example, lessons from the Netherlands' land reclamation projects or U.S. post-flood buyouts can inform New Zealand's efforts and vice versa. Cultural and geographic differences play a crucial role in how solutions are applied. A flood barrier that works in one country might fail in another because of differences in soil type, weather patterns, or building traditions. Likewise, strategies that make sense socially in one place might be rejected elsewhere. In some cultures, relocating a village might be seen as a practical safety measure. In others, it could be viewed as a deep loss of identity and heritage. Global collaboration must respect these differences. Sharing ideas is about offering tools, not imposing a single blueprint. Consider two cities facing similar threats. One is a wealthy port in Europe, and the other is a fishing town in Southeast Asia. Both face rising seas and frequent storms. The European city might invest in advanced pumps, high-tech barriers, and modernized ports. The fishing town might focus on rebuilding homes with elevated foundations and restoring mangroves to act as natural defenses. Through collaboration, the port city can share data and modeling techniques, while the fishing town shares knowledge about working with natural systems. Both benefit, even though their solutions look very different. Technology makes this kind of cooperation easier. Satellites track global weather and sea level changes, providing real-time data to countries that might not have their own monitoring systems. Online platforms allow engineers and planners to share designs, test results, and simulations instantly. During a disaster, international teams can coordinate response efforts and supply chains through digital communication. These connections turn local expertise into a collective resource. Training programs and exchanges are also vital. Engineers from one country can spend time working on projects in another, learning directly from different approaches. After returning home, they bring back not just technical skills, but also a broader perspective on problem solving. This cross-pollination creates a network of professionals who understand both local conditions and global trends. Over time, these relationships strengthen resilience worldwide. Global collaboration does not eliminate the challenges of disaster planning, but it makes them more manageable. Each country still faces its own political pressures, budget limits, and cultural considerations. Yet by sharing successes and failures, nations reduce the chance of repeating past mistakes. A seawall design tested in Japan might save lives in Chile. A retreat plan developed in New Zealand might guide decisions in Florida. Knowledge flows both ways, adapting as it moves. Disasters remind us that no community stands alone. Floodwaters, seismic waves, and storm surges do not stop at borders. The response must be equally fluid. Networks like the Inagen Alliance show how expertise can move across oceans and languages. From the heights of earthquake-resistant towers to the quiet restoration of wetlands, each idea adds to a global effort. In this way, collective wisdom grows, and the path toward resilience becomes clearer with every shared lesson. The cities of the future will not only stand taller and look more advanced, they will think and respond in ways that today's cities cannot. As disasters grow more frequent and severe, communities must evolve beyond simply surviving the next storm, quake, or fire. They must anticipate these events, react instantly, and adapt over time. The foundation of this future lies in designing smarter, more resilient systems that protect both people and infrastructure. Smart cities are beginning to take shape around the world. In these cities, sensors embedded in roads, bridges, and buildings collect constant streams of data. This data is analyzed in real time to track the health of structures and detect early signs of trouble. A bridge can alert engineers when its supports begin to weaken, long before a failure becomes visible. A water system can monitor pressure changes and detect leaks, preventing floods or contamination. When a storm approaches, citywide networks can adjust traffic lights to clear evacuation routes and guide emergency vehicles to the areas that need them most. Instead of reacting after damage occurs, these systems allow cities to act while a disaster is unfolding. Artificial intelligence plays a central role in managing this information. AI systems can process enormous amounts of data faster than humans. During an earthquake, for example, sensors in a high-rise building can send readings to an AI platform that immediately calculates whether the structure is safe. Elevators can lock in place, fire doors can seal automatically, and emergency teams can receive instructions within seconds. This type of automation saves lives by reducing the delay between event and response. Over time, AI can also learn from past disasters, improving predictions and refining strategies for future events. The Internet of Things, or IoT, links these technologies together. Every sensor, alarm, and control system becomes part of a network. In a hurricane-prone city, IoT devices might include wind speed monitors, tide gauges, and even smart streetlights that can broadcast alerts. If a storm surge breaches a levee, sensors detect the change and send instant warnings to residents' phones. This level of connection creates a living system where each part supports the whole. It also allows for precise, localized responses rather than broad citywide shutdowns. Looking ahead 50 years, the very shape of cities may change. Rising seas will make some current coastal areas uninhabitable. In response, engineers are exploring floating cities. These are not just clusters of bites, but entire neighborhoods built on platforms anchored offshore. Floating cities rise and fall with the tide, making them naturally resistant to flooding. They can include homes, parks, and even farms, all powered by renewable energy sources like solar and tidal power. While these concepts sound futuristic, pilot projects are already underway in countries such as the Netherlands and the Maldives. Amphibious architecture takes a similar approach on land. Instead of resisting water, buildings are designed to float when flooding occurs. Under normal conditions, they rest on solid ground. When rivers rise or storm surges push inland, the structures lift with the water. Anchored by guideposts to prevent drifting, this design protects property without the need for massive barriers. In some flood-prone regions, entire streets of amphibious homes could provide a safe alternative to repeated rebuilding after every storm. Future neighborhoods may also aim to be completely self-sufficient. These communities would generate their own power, produce their own food, and recycle water and waste internally. In a disaster, they could operate independently even if surrounding areas lost power or supplies. Solar panels, wind turbines, and battery storage would keep lights and medical equipment running. Greenhouses and vertical farms would ensure access to fresh food. Local water treatment systems would prevent contamination when municipal pipes fail. By reducing reliance on external systems, these neighborhoods would remain safe havens during crises. Imagine a coastal city in the year 2075. Rising seas have swallowed the old waterfront, but floating neighborhoods sit just offshore, connected to the mainland by flexible walkways. On land, amphibious houses line canals designed to carry away storm water. Sensors embedded throughout the city track everything from wind speeds to structural vibrations. When a hurricane approaches, AI systems analyze data and predict which areas will flood first. Traffic lights shift automatically to open evacuation routes. Drones deliver supplies to isolated homes before the storm hits. Afterward, modular repair teams move quickly to damaged areas, replacing broken sections of infrastructure like puzzle pieces. The entire city operates like a single coordinated machine focused on protecting its residents. This vision may seem far away, but its roots are visible today. Modular construction, once used mainly for temporary buildings, is now being applied to permanent structures. Hospitals, schools, and housing complexes can be built in sections and assembled rapidly after a disaster. During the COVID-19 pandemic, entire hospitals were completed in days using prefabricated modules. In the future, these techniques will allow cities to recover quickly while maintaining high safety standards. Disasters have always revealed weaknesses. The Great Fire of London showed that wood and narrow streets were dangerous. The San Francisco earthquake exposed the limits of unreinforced masonry. Hurricanes like Katrina revealed flaws in levee systems and urban planning. Each catastrophe forces communities to confront uncomfortable truths about their buildings, infrastructure, and systems. But these events also inspire progress. Out of destruction comes innovation. Steel frames replaced brittle brick. Seawalls and wetlands were built to hold back rising waters. Fire codes evolved to save lives in high-rises. Smarter, stronger rebuilding saves both lives and money. A city that invests in seismic retrofitting before a major quake spends far less than it would on rescue operations and reconstruction after the fact. A neighborhood with elevated homes and restored wetlands suffers less damage during floods, reducing insurance costs and human suffering. These investments may seem expensive at first, but they pay for themselves many times over by preventing future losses. As technology advances, the line between human and environmental systems will blur. Cities will not just sit on the landscape, they will interact with it. Buildings will adjust automatically to shifting conditions. Roads will guide water during storms, then return to normal use. Energy systems will adapt to changes in demand and supply in real time. This level of adaptability will make communities far more resilient than today's rigid infrastructure. Each catastrophe rewrites the rules of architecture. It teaches lessons that shape the next generation of buildings and cities. The future will bring new disasters, some we cannot yet imagine, but it will also bring new tools and ideas. Floating cities, amphibious homes, and self-sufficient neighborhoods may seem visionary now, just as skyscrapers once did. As the challenges of climate change grow, these innovations will move from concept to reality. The cities of tomorrow will not only endure disasters, but will evolve through them, becoming smarter, stronger, and more connected with each generation.